Star Fuentes here to introduce our second panel, 2021 New York and Long Island Forecast, People, Stories, and Issues to Watch, featuring Times Union Editor-at-Large, Rex Smith, NBC4 New York Long Island reporter, Greg Cergol, and Fox 5 Long Island reporter, Jodi Goldberg. Moderated by WCBS Newsradio 880 afternoon news anchor, Lynda Lopez. Don't forget when posting on social media to please use hashtag FMCPower. Good morning, Lynda.
Good morning, Star. Thank you for the introduction. Oh, I knew this was going to happen. My puppy is getting in here, so apologies. I'm apologizing off the bat. The Zoom with the puppy is always tough. Jodi and Greg and Rex, I am so excited for this conversation. Thank you guys for being here. This is a great one, I feel. And after this past year that we've been through, looking forward feels like a really great thing to do. So I'm excited to do that. All of us who have been working in news have been so consumed this past year with the pandemic, with telling the stories of it, with making sure we're getting the correct information out. Here in New York State, since we're covering everything from the city to Albany to Long Island, I think we can look back at the past year as far as this, but looking ahead, I'm thinking about the leadership that we've seen from Governor Cuomo. And so Governor Cuomo is one of the people, if we're talking about the people to watch, as we look back at his leadership that we've seen this past year, what do you think is to come in 2021? He very obviously, launched to a national spotlight this past year. So I wanted your thoughts on what's to come for the year.
Well, I'm since I have some geographic proximity to him, maybe I'll start off and let everybody else chime in here. I've been watching Cuomo's, plural, for almost 3 decades. I first came upstate as the Newsday Albany bureau chief in the tenure of Mario Cuomo when Andrew Cuomo was in law school. So, one of the interesting aspects of both Cuomos is that they do tend to make people tired sometimes. It is possible to develop Cuomo fatigue. And this is something that I think Andrew Cuomo needs to guard against because the very elements that make him an attractive politician in moments of crisis, his ability to dominate the conversation, to seize people's imagination, to be a powerful force, the kind of tough guy who's willing to stand up, that stuff can wear thin after a while. I think his hazard is being so much present, especially as he asserts control in a way that no governor has ever had before. And we can talk about this more if you like. The governor of New York has been a significantly more powerful governor than is true in most states. But even more power has amassed in the hands of Andrew Cuomo than any previous New York governor as a result of both actions of the legislature and the courts in recent years. So as he goes forward with this immense cloud in his hands, what looked so refreshing to the nation as a contrast to Donald Trump can sometimes wear on New Yorkers, which is something that will have implications, I think, for his popularity, and that in turn could have an impact on what the legislature is able to do if they're able to appeal to the public beyond him. So yes, Cuomo is a significant factor, but he may not be as potent in months to come as he has seemed in the past few months, I'd say.
I wonder if everyone downstate agrees, Greg and Jodi.
That's an interesting point. Definitely his potency people will keep their eyes on, and also, what he's going to do in the new year as far as rolling out the vaccines. Is he capable of getting more vaccines? Will we have what we need here, whether it be on the city or on Long Island or in Albany? The whole state really has their eyes on him, glued, watching to see what he's going to do for us during a time when everyone needs it. People are waiting.
Yeah, Lynda, what you were saying, what's ahead for Governor Cuomo, I think we've already seen it. As Rex said, he can become a lightning rod for a lot of what's going on in the state. And we're seeing that here on Long Island. I mean, last year in the state legislative elections, really the governor was the focal point of a lot of the races, and Republicans made inroads on Long Island because of some of the agenda of the governor that some Long Islanders disagreed with. So he'll continue to be a lightning rod and a guy that's going to get criticism. What I find interesting, I think in recent weeks, we've begun to see an evolution where the governor is sort of pulling back a little bit and not wanting to dictate so much and leaving it up to local officials to make decisions. I think that maybe he senses that he can't continue to charge into this problem and just kind of be the one dictating what happens all the time. So, but I think that he's, as I said, he's going to be the guy that's the focus of criticism and praise for the remainder of this pandemic.
It's true. Yeah, excellent point. And along those same lines, as you were saying, Governor Cuomo is leaving so much up to more municipalities and localities. Are you noticing anyone anywhere around the state who's sort of filling a good leadership role, who's, you know, taking these pandemic issues and making their constituents feel like there's some leadership happening there?
You know, county executives have limited clout. Counties in the state of New York basically are pass-through institutions, and so they're that is, they pass through funds and they administer social services. But in the pandemic, counties have actually had more to do than is usually the case, and so on a local level, I think you probably have some county executives who are showing leadership, who would like to think that they are in positions of authority, but it's just hard for them to break out of their media bubbles in their individual markets. And the reality of New York politics is that it's dominated by the city. And I mean, from up here in the vast reach of upstate, which is everything from Buffalo to Plattsburgh to Albany, or maybe it's everything north of 125th Street in Manhattan. I don't know.
Right, north of Westchester to us, you're all of that.
That's upstate, whatever. But from here, you know, you would say that the state is really run by the MTA region. It's run by the city, by Long Island, by Westchester, Rockland, and so the political power really comes from there. I can't imagine how New York will ever again have a governor who's not from downstate. When I first was covering the legislature, Long Island had 9 Republican state senators. It was the single powerful bloc, and that's how you had Senate Majority Leaders in Ralph Marino and then Dean Skelos coming from Long Island as a power center. Now that power is diffused as the Long Island political scene varies from year to year. So I just wonder if a county official, if a local official can emerge, other than someone, say, Laura Curran from Nassau County, who I think has statewide aspirations.
You know, yeah, Rex makes an excellent point that actually I think that Laura Kern has been very visible, at least from the standpoint of the city, while the pandemic has been going on.
And that's
Yeah,
what I was going to say. Sorry, Greg. I was going to say that she has been visible, both her and Steve Bellone in Suffolk County. They've been holding these daily press conferences, especially at the height of the pandemic. Steve Bellone was doing them online. Laura Curran was doing them in person, really making themselves visible. And yesterday I did a story about high school high-risk sports able to resume. And Governor Cuomo set these state guidelines and left it up to the counties and individual school districts whether they wanted to modify them. So he is giving them some sort of power to allow them to, whether they get tested weekly, and change that. I think he's setting state guidelines and allowing the counties to modify from there.
Greg, how are Long Islanders feeling about the county executives?
I guess we're going to find out. That's one of the big stories for this year. Nassau County Executive Curran up for re-election. I mean, it's hard to judge in this Zoom world how people are feeling, because I think, you know, Rex talked about people want to see their leaders out front and And the county executives have tried to do that to a certain degree, but while they voiced their opinions, Laura Kern, for example, talked early on about restaurants need to open. And at the time she was bucking the governor's stance on that. But for the most part, I think they've been a little reticent about going out front. They didn't want to create a situation, as we've seen between Mayor de Blasio and the governor, where there's conflict between them. So, I think for the most part, people have felt like the information that the county executives have given them has been helpful, and seeing them is comforting. But again, it's really hard to judge when everybody is locked up inside their homes.
Is there something that we're not seeing from other parts of the state regarding the county executives and their leadership?
Well, the fact is there are county executives and mayors who might step out in their local communities, but outside the downstate area, none of them has the capacity to have a media reach that can have that impact. That's why Laura Curran is interesting, because she is close enough to the media ecosystem of New York City that she can command enough mass to get attention. And I think one of so yes, there, for example, the county executive in Albany County, one of the counties that we cover at the Times Union, is out there every day also. But the Albany media market is not big enough to have an impact statewide, whereas Nassau County, you can reach into the larger media ecosystem. The other factor to consider, though, if Laura Curran survives this election and is reelected, is where she is. If she starts to move on a statewide race, I would mention that she came up to do a tour. She dropped in to see us at the Times Union last year, which is not what a Nassau County executive usually does. But she's a former reporter, so maybe it was all for good journalism, right? But so does she step forward, and then what part of the Democratic Party does she really align with? Because the legislative party and the gubernatorial party are not always eye to eye, and but if you step outside, if you, as Bill de Blasio has found, if you get crossways with Andrew Cuomo, there's hell to pay for it. So
both you and Greg have given me the segue into Bill de Blasio and the mayor of New York City. So I have a couple of questions about that for all of you, because we are really getting into the thick of the mayor's race now. The Democratic primary is happening in June, which is not as far off as it might seem. And we're seeing candidates really start, emerging sort of a lot of them to the forefront. So I'll put this to you, Rex, but I'll put it to everyone. We know how fraught the relationship is between de Blasio and Governor Cuomo. So is a new mayor going to fare better with the governor, or is this, can we expect that kind of clash as we go forward?
I don't think the next mayor will do any better unless she or he decides to. I think you can't win with Andrew Cuomo. I think that his approach to dealing with every other politician almost borders on scorched earth, because anybody could be a challenge. Anybody who is too popular could be a threat to him. So your only solution really is to fall into line if you can. As long as you can. And so I can't imagine that the next mayor is going to do any better at averting the pain that Andrew Cuomo can inflict. But who is that next person going to be? Does anybody have any idea who the next mayor of New York is going to be?
Well,
before we get into that, I wanted to ask Greg also.
I would agree with what Rex was saying, because Governor Cuomo is a personality that I think likes to control the scene, and he basically is the de facto leader of the Democratic Party in the state, and I don't think that other Democrats are going to, if they assert themselves, they're going to run up against that, and I wonder if they are willing to do that because of his strength, because of his political reach. I mean, he came out here to Long Island when he was first elected. We had a Republican county executive in Nassau County, and he reached out to the Republican Nassau County executive, Mangano at the time. And I think because he realized that Long Island was a place that was not necessarily a Democratic stronghold to the extent of New York City. And so he wanted to build support out here, which was something his father did not do. And it cost him eventually, but I'm kind of diverting off the path. I don't think that, I think that if a Democratic candidate for mayor in New York butts heads with the governor, it's at their own peril.
Exactly. And I think Jodi can attest to this too. We have seen that.
I would have to
butting of
agree.
heads, yeah.
You don't want to get caught in the crosshairs. I mean, some of what he said at press conferences and the way he snipped at reporters, I'm sure that would happen with the next mayor of New York.
Mhm. And then Rex, of course, puts the question, who is that next person going to be? There are so many interesting people and getting into this very, very crowded field. I wonder if anyone, I've got a whole list of people we can go through, but just to start off, who jumps out most to each of you as the most interesting character in this mayoral race? And if it's more than one person, that's okay too. If you're looking at, Eric Adams, who many people have been talking about for so long, Scott Stringer, Andrew Yang, Ray McGuire, who has a Wall Street background, but is going to go ahead and get into the race. And while you guys think about it, I'll actually, I'll ask this question too. Since this past year saw really the rise of the fight for racial justice again, like we haven't seen in the country in so long, I wonder if a candidate for mayor in New York is going to be the typical candidate for mayor that we normally see, or are New Yorkers really going to be reaching for someone new and different and someone who doesn't look like the candidates we normally see?
I'll start that while you both are brainstorming, because I don't have an opinion about who the next mayor may be, but I do agree with you, Lynda, that it needs to be somebody different, in the sense where I feel like New Yorkers, especially in the city, feel like we have to just go a different route after seeing what's gone on over these past years.
I kind of feel that I wouldn't venture a guess on who I think the choice might be, but I kind of wonder about these folks who are kind of parachuting into the race, like Yang. I mean, I think that New Yorkers want New Yorkers. They want people that understand what their life is like, who know what it means to get on that subway and work as New Yorkers do. And I just kind of, and I know that, I guess Mayor de Blasio probably doesn't fit into that category, and he won, so maybe I'm way off base, but I just, as someone born in Queens, I always look at it and say, like, who's the real New Yorker in this race? And I think that New Yorkers will identify with that person.
In a crowded race in New York, I think you have to, I'm just speaking as an old political writer, you have to look at where's labor. Where are the unions going? And you think about a couple of instances where in times past when it's made a difference. When Andrew Cuomo left the Attorney General's job to run for governor, there was a crowded primary, and Eric Schneiderman emerged as the Democratic nominee in that crowded race with very low turnout, but he had significant labor support, which brought him not only campaign volunteers, but also donations. And it becomes a snowball, some of the unions then attach on to others. So same thing happened, what's the other? Actually, Andrew Cuomo himself, his emergence as his ability to become governor, actually, or was it his race for Attorney General that happened because he got the early endorsement of 1199 of SEIU, and that. So I think that if somebody in this mayoral race, a crowded race, which is going to have so few voters, if somebody gets the early endorsement of some of the significant labor unions, 32BJ, 1199. These are going to be, that could be decisive, but I wouldn't want anybody to make too much of a, I wouldn't hazard a guess because, 8 years ago at this time, we would have said, oh, Christine Quinn is going to be the first woman mayor of New York City. So, there are these strong candidates. You mentioned the people who we've heard about for years, Eric Adams and Scott Stringer, and now Ray McGuire's making this challenge and Andrew Yang coming in from the side. And you're saying a non-traditional candidate, somebody like a Maya Wiley, for example, somebody who would not be a traditional powerhouse, but might be able to wiggle through in a crowded primary, which is what happened to Bill de Blasio. He came in when other candidates faltered, and few people would have expected him to come out of that initial primary 8 years ago.
I think your point about labor, really, it speaks to what Greg says too. It's what many New Yorkers feel is a real New Yorker, sort of in the trenches with you and knowing what it is to be someone who, if not was born and raised, is really a person who is a creature of the city. And so I wonder if some of these people who almost have a celebrity air about them, like an Andrew Yang or even a Maya Wiley, who people may know from her media presence, do they cut through and connect with people other than people knowing who they are from social media and TV?
I think that's a great question. I think the cutting through, being able to cut through, even if you have a small chunk of very committed people, or if there's an issue that leaps out. What made the difference for de Blasio, I think, was the carriages in the park. The people started, the animal rights people, and I can't remember now where the funding came from, but the animal rights people started demonstrating at Christine Quinn's events, and the mayor promised to get rid of the carriages to save the horses in the park. The mayor, Bill de Blasio, and who would have thought that could be an issue? But that just kind of was the little hole that widened, and the current widened the hole further and gave him an opening to run through. So we just can't tell at this point even what that issue might be or who could. But I think your point about being is good, about being a media presence who might have a small band of real supporters could be the wedge that opens the pathway for someone.
And one thing I would add, just depending on coronavirus, what we have to take into consideration now, how will campaigning look come, this summer, even the spring? As early as the spring, how will campaigning look? Are they going to, as you said, cut through social media? It's hard to shake somebody's hand nowadays.
Right.
So how will they get across to convey that they are New Yorkers, that they are someone we're looking for as a New Yorker to be the next mayor?
Yeah. Greg, I was wondering what you thought.
That's going to, going on what Jodi was saying, that's going to make the organization key. Who has a good organization? Because you're not going to be able to go to people's houses and have groups of people sit around and ask you questions, and you're going to need people who can organize Zoom meetings and get you in contact with the union folks that Rex talked about, and reach out to the different civic organizations, community groups. The organization is going to be key. But as we learned from national politics, a strong personality with a good Twitter feed can get a lot accomplished. So I think Rex makes a great point. We just don't know what an issue may spring up that may kind of encapsulate what a candidate is, and that's how people make their decisions. Oh, look, he likes dogs, so I'm going to vote for him. So we just don't know what's going to happen.
Now that we're just
thought, just don't discount the value of a good loss for a politician. That is, remember that the last real political campaign that Mario Cuomo was involved in before he was elected governor was a losing primary to Ed Koch for mayor. you can lose well and propel yourself further. And the statewide Democratic primary electorate is different from the city electorate. It's a more conservative, it's a broader base, I think. And so you could have, I'm making this up, but you could have an Andrew Yang who doesn't make it as a candidate for mayor, who emerges as a strong primary candidate for governor. So this is, I think we need to bear in mind that politics delivers unusual answers all the time, questions we don't even think about.
No, and for sure, the New York City mayor's race is one of the quickest ways to step into the spotlight in a big way, not just in the city, but in the state, and even to some extent in the country. So throwing your hat into that ring and not expecting to win is not necessarily a losing proposition for any of these people who are looking to jump in. You know, now that we're about halfway through, I'm going to check some of the questions that we've got that have been coming in. They're have to do a bit with our conversation. And the first very good one, since we've been talking about Governor Cuomo, could Governor Cuomo be thinking about running for president in the future? And I'd be interested in all of your thoughts. If not, then why do you think not? His name has been in that mix and in that conversation, it seems, for so long. And we never know that, you know, though he says he won't run, that he's completely out of that race or that thought.
I think he would. I think it's a possibility, but it's you know, it's a hard race running for president, obviously, and New Yorkers haven't done well in it in recent years, not since FDR, and so it's. I don't know how Andrew Cuomo plays in the cornfields of Iowa, and whether he would have the resonance with the emerging Democratic voters of the South. So it just, I think it would be a harder job running for president, that job, than anything he's done before. But I think he has the ambition. And nowadays we've seen that his age does not inhibit it, because he's young by comparison to recent presidential candidates.
By recent standards.
Yeah.
My big question about Governor Cuomo running for president is his mentor, of course, was his dad. And in 1984, after his dad spoke at the Democratic convention, everyone wanted Mario Cuomo to run for president. He struck a nerve with his speech, and he, you know, came to be called the Hamlet on the Hudson, because he couldn't make up his mind, but ultimately decided not to run. And I wonder if Andrew Cuomo was affected by that. Whatever, I don't know the reasons why Mario Cuomo didn't run for president, but was Andrew affected by that? Or maybe does he see it as unfinished business for the family for him to run for president? So it's hard to judge. But you know, his father not running, I think, could impact his decision, you know, down the road.
I think it's something that we have to wait and see. I think that he's in the spotlight here in New York, but as Rex said, what does he look like to the rest of the country? And then Mario not running, maybe it's something he wants, maybe he wants to finish unfinished business. So we're waiting.
You know,
we're waiting. I mean, I was waiting to hear if he'd go this time, and we all heard no.
You know, we get caught up in it in New York because this is such a big media market. And I remember when I was covering Mario Cuomo, once I flew out to California to do a story about the draft Cuomo movement in late in the spring of '88. Actually, it was not the second time that he was getting ready to run. And I was in a taxi, and I said to the guy, I'm a newspaper reporter from New York, and I'm here to assess whether Mario Cuomo, the governor of New York, might be a presidential candidate. And the taxi driver said, "Oh yeah, I hear she's a tough lady." So, you know, our people that we think are so huge
Right.
may not cut through as much as we tend to think they do, just because we're in the center of this media market.
Yeah, it's true. Taking a look at some of the other questions, we have President Biden. We have a new administration to look forward to, and that we're experiencing right now for 2021. Will Biden be good for New York?
Mm.
I think it's funny because I think when we look at it from a New York City standpoint, it's he's being surprisingly progressive in these first few days of what he's trying to accomplish, put out by executive order. And it's hard to judge, how much of that is just overturning what was there and how much, is really a true, sort of North Star of a progressive direction that he might want to go in, and which I think is appealing to New Yorkers, and at least in the city, in a big way. So I was wondering what you thought.
If he restores the reductions on the state and local taxes, that will make a lot of New Yorkers happy.
That mortgage deduction.
Yeah. If New York can't do well now with the Senate Majority Leader from New York, with a president who is supposedly a friend of our governor, Andrew Cuomo was a great supporter of Joe Biden early on in this campaign. With the governor who used to be a cabinet secretary, if New York can't do well now, we never will. This is the time when we should, but bear in mind, last week when the governor laid out his state budget, he said, if the federal government doesn't come through with $15 billion in aid for the state of New York, I will sue the federal government. So that would be something. Cuomo versus Biden, the state of New York suing the federal government. The governor's theory is that the federal government is to blame for all the costs that the state has incurred as a result of the coronavirus, the federal government failing to respond during the Trump administration. So he is putting as much, he's putting a lot of chips on his relationship with the president, I think. And I think that it will probably, I actually think it'll work. I think that the president is going to be good for New York, and having Chuck Schumer there will really back it up.
Greg or Jodi?
I did a story soon after the inauguration, and one of the stats, 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. With on Long Island, we have about 500,000. I spoke to several Dreamers or DACA recipients who were thrilled about this change in administration, and they're hopeful under Biden and Harris there will be change. And that, I think we could look at what he did just the first few days in office. 1 in 5 immigrants on Long Island are undocumented, and I think that's a change they're looking forward to as well, in addition to all that you both mentioned.
Greg.
I was going to tag on to what Rex was saying. I mean, with Chuck Schumer as the majority leader in the Senate, I mean, Chuck Schumer, of course, has to worry about the national picture and see the big picture. But at his core, you know, he is a local politician, and he knows what the needs of his constituents in New York are. And I don't think he's going to lose sight of that. And so, if, as Rex said, if New York doesn't fare well under this scenario, we'll never fare well, because we have a guy in there who's making the case for what this area needs, you know, constantly because of his position of power. So I would think it would be good for New York moving forward.
You know, as I think about President Biden's executive orders yesterday and the day before, he signed several focusing on racial justice, focusing on what he said needs to be attacked as far as systemic racism in the country. And again, we were talking about the racial justice protests that were happening here in New York, you know, so intensely all summer. In that area, I think it's so interesting because I wanted to ask who you're seeing emerge on that front. here in the city, I think a lot of us became a lot more familiar with Jumaane Williams. I know Eric Adams also was out on the street a lot. There were some leaders who wanted to communicate to New Yorkers that this was an important issue to them. And I was wondering who you see emerging, if we're looking, at the people and issues who we'll see more of in 2021 in this arena. What do you think we'll see?
Well, breaking news, by the way, apropos our conversation a few minutes ago about the danger of breaking with Andrew Cuomo. As we've been here, I've just read that Tish James, the Attorney General, has released a report finding that the state health department may have undercounted COVID-19 deaths in nursing homes by 50%.
Letitia James is next on my list, Rex.
Oh, well,
yes.
This is dangerous. I mean, I think she is somebody to be reckoned with. And I have not seen her. She was elected with the express support of Andrew Cuomo. She came into, again, a crowded Democratic primary, but she had the governor with her. And I have not seen anything that she's done until this, where she has in any way taken issue with the governor. But she's saying that the state that Andrew Cuomo's health department has undercounted nursing home deaths. He's very sensitive about this topic. We've been writing about this all the time up here. And the state has refused to really release the data that would underlie their report that the state did nothing wrong with the nursing homes. So I think Tish James stepping out puts her at risk, but it also may make her a coalescing presence for those who are looking for an alternative to Andrew Cuomo, and maybe for people who are looking for a person of color for the next campaign.
Letitia James is right here on our short list of people we should be watching in 2021. She made so many bold moves just as we got to the end of 2020. So I was wondering your guys' reaction.
That's an interesting combination. Her criticizing the governor. So yes, I mean, the attorney general. Strong attorney generals have always had a powerful voice, and she has focused on issues that you brought up, Lynda. So I think that she could drive the conversation in a big way in that area. I mean, out here on Long Island, I was going to say, I haven't seen anybody emerge in terms of the racial justice issue. One person to kind of be the voice of that, to voice an agenda, and you wonder if that's going to be a problem moving forward so that they don't lose the momentum that was created last summer. There need, as crazy as it is to have just one voice, there seems to be a lack of someone to communicate what we need to do to go from protests to actual change. And maybe the Attorney General will take up that mantle.
I'd just add that I think we need someone, especially on Long Island, to take that role, to take on that role rather, just somebody who will lead the way for these people.
Yeah, I find that. And Rex, about Letitia specifically, what do you think of some of these really bold lawsuits that she's been bringing and the moves that she's been making?
Well,
what can we expect in 2021?
It goes with the office. I mean, the Attorney General's role, especially in New York, but not just here, but the Attorney General has this great opportunity to go into court and throw elbows around and make things happen. And that's, of course, how Eliot Spitzer became governor, because he was tough in the courts. And Schneiderman, remember, at one point before his fall, was considered one of the most influential liberal voices in the country because of the platform of the Attorney General's office in New York. So she has inherited a job that implicitly gives her an opportunity, or intrinsically gives her an opportunity to make those kinds of bold moves. But there's the racial justice, economic justice drive is something that a lot of people will play a role in. Bear in mind that both legislative leaders now are Black. Andrea Stewart Cousins in the Senate, and Carl Hastie in the Assembly. And so this is a state with significant political leadership involving people of color. And so the person who can harness that, if there is a way to harness that electoral power, could be a real force in New York State.
Yeah,
Could be a challenge to the governor, right? Could there be a primary challenge that could come from that kind of a coalition, that could come from one that draws on the racial justice plea? I wonder.
That's interesting. That's the question that we were wondering about the mayoral race here. What do you guys think, Jodi and Greg?
In terms of that becoming an issue to propel candidates?
Yeah.
I think it's one of the issues that the new president has laid out as his pillars of things we need to do. So I think that if someone can seize on that and lay out an agenda that's cogent and has strides that can be made, it can absolutely be an issue to propel people.
And I think, like you, Rex, mentioned the carriages back when de Blasio was running, I think that is going to be part of the key of what will help elect the next mayor. But I think we have to wait to see.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we got in our Q&A is the biggest issue in Albany versus Long Island versus New York City. Do you think we are unified in the pandemic in being our biggest issue, or are there, the issues that are caused by that are really affecting like the citizens of these different areas?
Yeah, I think the pandemic overrides everything at this point, because nothing gets fixed until that does. And the Donald Trump's failure to recognize that is what led to his political demise. If he had only dealt with the pandemic seriously, he could have kept the economy in shape and he might have been able to get reelected, notwithstanding all the craziness of the past 4 years. And so I don't think there's anything bigger than that. Is when I move around different parts of the state, I even now in this era when it's all by car and you don't get out much, still you see issues that, you see a lot of economic decay. You see communities that are in ruins almost. But the solution to that is in the kind of economic rebirth that can only come after the coronavirus is fixed. So at least upstate, even though people don't like to admit it, in the Republican areas of the state, people are still not wanting to wear masks. People are still ticked off at the government for doing too much. And yet, I think that getting that under control is the biggest issue, right?
I think from a city standpoint, we think about schools, for example, being what really drives a lot of the conversation and some of the frustration. And then there's also the issue of people leaving the city. I know Long Island is actually benefiting from that in some ways. But I was wondering what you guys thought.
I think that out here, some key issues, as you mentioned, schools, the restaurants, the businesses, the economy, but it all stems, or rather ties to the pandemic as the overall issue. And I think it's fair to say that goes throughout the state, that out here on Long Island, while we are getting an influx of students coming from the city, schools are an issue, businesses, economic, restaurants, because of the pandemic.
Great.
It's been really incredible, Lynda, how like an octopus, the pandemic just reaches into so many different areas. And another issue that I see out here on Long Island is that the pandemic has basically accelerated business problems in downtown areas or malls. We're seeing businesses closing, and you wonder if they're ever going to come back, and then what becomes of empty mall space, empty office space. There's going to be a push by the people who own these properties probably to convert them to housing, because that's sort of the new trend out here in the suburbs, that we're seeing housing being built in downtowns and the like, and office areas being converted. And the community at large is generally opposed to new housing. So it's going to create kind of a big issue of putting the needs of property owners against what communities want. And will it change the face of Long Island as we know it right now? I just think that the pandemic has sped all of this up. And I think we're going to be seeing this problem, this issue come to the fore a lot in the next year or so.
I think that's one of the most interesting questions. Does it change not just communities, but the leadership that we're going to see on Long Island and really everywhere throughout the state?
You know what I wonder about those of you on Long Island. I lived on the North Shore of Long Island in Huntington for 7 years, but I'm not in touch anymore with really what's going on there. Is there much resonance of the climate change issue, on shorelines in different parts of the country? That's a huge topic because of the devastation that is wrought by the storms that are more fierce because of climate change. Is that having an impact on Long Island at all?
We miss you in Huntington, Rex. They're really, I mean, there are obviously environmental groups out here that make the case, but there doesn't seem to be that urgency that you might hear in other places here, and that is surprising.
People have an eye on Montauk, whether that will be underwater in a few years from now, but nothing new. Also Long Beach, whether building on is a bad idea or good for the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, it will be interesting to see. I have a friend in Long Beach who, after the last big storm, which was that?
Superstorm anyway, Sandy?
Yeah, raised his home,
yeah.
A modest home, but it is no longer because it's been raised up and he can stay there. And, Joe Biden says that he's going to provide funding to do that around the country. And that's going to be part of the climate change response that he announced yesterday. And I just wonder if that's going to have a positive effect on Long Island, if there's going to be a lot of economic development coming as a result of this drive by Biden to bring climate change to the fore.
Especially since it seems like the pandemic is driving more people to the island, people who
right.
live in the city.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Jodi or Greg, did you want to weigh in?
No, with a lot of people coming to Long Island, I think there's going to be places they need to go, as Greg mentioned, whether these storefronts are closing and will turn into housing developments. People are coming from the city. Where are they going? Yeah, they're going to our schools. Our schools are filling up. We've done stories about that, about increased occupancy inside the classrooms during a time when coronavirus, you have to social distance. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes and where the people go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we have just a little less than 10 minutes left for our conversation. So I wanted to make sure that I got from each of you, because this has been a year that's been so dominated by pandemic news and the election. That's what we focused on. I wanted to ask each of you, just in sort of your daily work of reporting, are there any things that got really drowned out in the past year that you hope in the coming year we are talking about a lot more, or whether it's issues, whether it's people, whether it's communities? Are there things that, because we had to put so much energy into the big issues that were happening in 2020, that there are some things that you feel deserve a lot more oxygen in 2021?
There was what we call, I guess, a spot news story out here that was at the top of our news and then just fell off the map. It was a story about a young boy who died allegedly at the hands of his father and stepmother. He was left in his garage, and that case has kind of languished now because of the pandemic and the court system, but it raised a lot of questions about child caring for children and how the courts handle divorce cases and who looks after kids. It seemed to be building toward a great debate about, do we need reforms in family court and things of that nature, and it just kind of fell away with the pandemic. And you hope that that discussion picks up again. Suffolk County created, I believe, a special commission to look into this. But again, with everything that's happened with the pandemic, the whole debate about that has kind of taken a step back, and you would hope that that comes back to the fore, because the health and safety of kids could lay in the balance if we don't pay attention to that.
That's right. It's actually, for people who don't remember, that was a story that was just about this time last year, just about a year
Yes.
ago.
Year
A
ago,
horribly
January
heartbreaking
17th.
story about a
That
young
was
boy
one
who
of
was
the
left
biggest.
overnight in the garage in the
Yes.
winter by his dad, and who died as a result the next day. And so,
And it stretches into the city. He was a former, NYPD officer. Thomas Valva was his name, and it was a year ago on, I believe, the 17th. And I saw on Facebook, a lot of advocates for childcare. They all were upset that it didn't get the attention they say it deserved. But with the pandemic at the forefront, it's hard, especially when these court cases are all being adjourned or they're being held virtually because of coronavirus. One other issue that just comes to mind, gangs on Long Island. It was something that was discussed. I know Donald Trump brought it up many times. It was something the DA, Timothy Sini, was discussing, and that kind of took a step back after coronavirus as well.
I think we ought to, by the way, I think that child abuse, that story actually got a lot of play around the country, appropriately so. But there are individual cases like that everywhere in the country, and that really deserves attention. That really does. But I also think education is, education is a perennial story. It's one of the great beats that every news organization covers. But the peril to American education that has just been exacerbated by the pandemic is significant, both K-12 and higher education. Higher education is in crisis. The demographic shift, the number of college-age students is dropping now. That's just a natural thing. And there are increasing questions from parents as to what is the value of investing in this education for my young people. How are we going to pay for it? It's very expensive for students. And Donald Trump's policies were disastrous for colleges and universities, in part because he restricted the flow of immigrants who are making up an increasing part of the American student population, and made it harder for them to stay here, to get jobs here, to stay for graduate school. The result is we are being threatened by higher education centers around the globe as we never were before the Trump administration. At the same time, it's facing these other challenges, demographic challenges that are in financial peril that are putting it in trouble. So I think and America's dominance in the world has in part been fueled by our educational system being stronger than anybody else's. And if we lose that, if we lose the attractiveness of American education, I think the country's in just terrible shape.
and it's true. You think about the real issues that were a focus right before the pandemic hit, the things that we knew we wanted to find big fixes for, that have really just sort of gotten, if not overlooked a little, just sort of covered over by the fact that we have these larger issues to deal with.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I am going to go to one last question, just so we get to most of the questions that came in. What's in the cards for Mayor de Blasio's future? We know he already made a run for president, so I thought for the New Yorkers, I would pose that interesting question if you guys had any guesses for what might be in Bill de Blasio's head for his future.
A model for the big and tall stores.
Yeah. He'd be hard pressed to get a job out here on Long Island, Lynda. I'll tell you that.
Have a rough time there, Jodi.
Oh, for sure. I mean, who's to say?
Well, you guys, thank you so much, Rex and Jodi and Greg. This was a phenomenal conversation, as I knew it would be. So I was grateful for all of your insight, and this was so much fun. Thank you for doing this today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great fun.